Yes, it's very true what I did. I kicked my mother-in-law out of my house in the middle of the night. She had nowhere to go. It was 2 a.m. She couldn't drive. It was raining out, and I don't care what happened to her. And you're probably wondering, well, man, that's pretty messed up. Well, she made my wife cry, but it goes so much deeper than that. See, my wife just recently allowed her mom, my mother-in-law, to come back into her life because of years and years and years of horrible stuff that she did to her. And finally, just when they were starting to rekindle, you won't believe what she said. I'm 32 male, my wife 25. We've been married for 3 years, but we've been together for 5. And are expecting our first child, a son, in just a few short months. Our relationship had some rough patches in them, but I was fresh out of an abusive relationship and she had never had a boyfriend before, so despite the challenges, one thing that always bothered me was how she constantly put herself down. 6 months into our relationship, it became unbearable watching this amazing woman be so disappointed in herself. I convinced her to try therapy. I joined her for a couple sessions because even in that short time, I'd fallen deeply in love with her. During those sessions, I learned the devastating truth. Her parents were textbook narcissists who worshipped her brother as their golden child while treating her like an afterthought. When she finally opened up about the abuse she endured, I broke down crying. That experience transformed us into the strong couple we are today and helped her become the confident woman she is now. So fast forward to the present day. Now, my in-laws have supposedly improved over the years, which is why we've upgraded from no contact to low contact. My mother-in-law recently flew in from overseas to, quote, help, since my wife is pregnant and it's only been a week, but I've watched my vibrant, glowing wife become a shadow of herself. Last night, everything came to a head. My wife woke up craving apple juice, so she slipped out of bed to get some while I went to the bathroom. When I came back, I found a broken glass on the floor, juice everywhere, and mother-in-law screaming at my trembling wife. Without thinking, I shouted at mother-in-law to get out of our house immediately. When she tried to argue, I threatened to call the police, which finally made her leave. After she left, my wife collapsed in my arms, sobbing. Apparently, my mother-in-law had caught her drinking apple juice and went ballistic, screaming that it would, hurt the baby, and that my wife did not deserve to be a mother, if she was going to behave so recklessly. Okay, for context, our doctor has confirmed that moderate amounts of apple juice is perfectly fine during pregnancy. What makes this especially infuriating is that my wife has been meticulous about her pregnancy, tracking every nutrient, reading every book, following every guideline from her doctor, and she even gave up her beloved daily coffee completely, despite being told 1 cup would be okay. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, has been accidentally bringing food into our house that's actually dangerous during pregnancy, like unpasteurized cheese, deli meat that hasn't been heated properly, and when my wife politely declined the food, my mother-in-law would sigh dramatically and mutter about modern mothers being too paranoid. Now, my phone's blowing up with messages from her entire family calling me an a-hole for kicking an elderly woman out in the middle of the night. Even my own parent called to say that I overreacted and should have let her stay until morning. I understand their concerns about sending her out at night, but seeing my pregnant wife shaking and crying, I couldn't think of any other solution. Here's where I might be the a-hole. I didn't just kick her out, I threw her suitcase onto the front lawn and told her if she ever spoke to my wife like that again, she would never ever meet her grandbaby. Maybe that was a bit too harsh, or not harsh enough. My wife has stopped crying, but now she's worried this whole situation will stress the baby. She keeps asking if we should just apologize to keep the peace for the sake of family harmony. I refuse to budge on this, but the pressure is mounting from all sides. My brother-in-law sent a text saying I've, quote, destroyed the family and that I'm isolating my wife just like her abusive ex. I've never even met her ex, and as far as I know, she's never had one before me. It's like they've created an entirely fictional version of our relationship just to justify their anger. So I ask you guys this, am I the a-hole for prioritizing my wife's mental health over my mother-in-law's comfort? And more importantly, how do I protect my wife from these people without causing her more stress during her pregnancy? Update number 1. It's been 3 days since I kicked my mother-in-law out, and what started as family drama has morphed into something far more sinister. First, I want to thank you for the support on my original post. Your validation helped both my wife and me stay strong throughout what happened next. The morning after the incident, my wife's brother, the golden child, showed up at our door unannounced. For context, he lives about 15 minutes away but has only visited twice in the 3 years we've owned the home. He demanded to speak to my wife alone, which I refused given her fragile emotional state. When I stood my ground, he slipped an envelope under the door and left with a cryptic "She'll want to see this" message. The envelope contained old childhood photos of my wife that she had never seen before. Pictures of her achievements, spelling bee trophies, science fair medals, that her parents had apparently kept hidden because they, quote, belonged to the family, not her. But that wasn't what broke her. See, my wife, mixed in with the family vacation photo showing her brother at Disney World, the Grand Canyon, and other places during weeks when my wife had been told that she was too difficult to bring along and had been left with distant relatives instead. I could see what my brother-in-law was trying to do. He knew my wife's sensitive points, and he was trying to push them to manipulate things in their own way. Well, my wife spiraled after seeing these, and she couldn't stop crying, saying that she'd always believed her parents when they said they could not afford family trips, only to discover they'd simply left her behind. Our therapist had to make an emergency house call to help her process this targeted emotional warfare. While dealing with psychological bombs, I discovered my mother-in-law had contacted my boss. My boss called me, awkwardly explaining that an older woman had reached out, concerned that I was exhibiting alarming violent tendencies at home. She apparently painted a picture of me as an abusive husband keeping my wife isolated. Well, thankfully, my boss has met my wife multiple times at company events and found the accusation suspicious enough to warn me rather than take action. I'd say the most disturbing development happened yesterday. My wife's prenatal vitamin bottle looked wrong. The seal was tampered with in a way that didn't match how we usually open it. I compared it to our backup bottle and noticed the pill looked slightly different in color. So I called a doctor, who advised us to bring the bottle in and not to take any of it. The lab results aren't back yet, but the nurse said this appears to be residue of something that shouldn't be there. They advised us to file a police report, which we're doing tomorrow. That's not all. This morning, we discovered somebody had accessed my wife's medical portal and changed her emergency contact info from me to her mom. The hospital confirmed the changes were made from an IP address that doesn't match our home network. The timing isn't coincidental. See, my mother-in-law was asking about my wife's medical details and the day before she was kicked out, claiming she needed them in case of an emergency. I've installed security cameras throughout the property, changed our locks, and contacted a lawyer to discuss a restraining order. My wife is devastated, but resolute. She says this has erased any lingering guilt about cutting contact with her family. Her brother texted her last night with a message claiming that their mother was just trying to protect her grandchild from my wife's supposed incompetence. He had the nerve to ask why she couldn't be grateful for once. Then this morning, he followed up with another text where he threatened that her father would contest her inheritance from her grandmother if we persuaded what he called a ridiculous vitamin accusation. He even had the audacity to remind her that she wasn't the only grandchild her grandmother loved. Okay, for context, my wife's grandmother passed away last year and left her like a modest inheritance, money that we've been saving for the baby's future education. We had no idea her parents could even threaten that, but apparently they've been co-executors of the estate and have been, quote, holding the funds until my wife, quote, matures enough to handle money responsibly. I'm at a loss for words. How do people justify this level of cruelty? We have a doctor's appointment tomorrow to check the baby and make sure everything's okay. I'll update when I know more. For now, we're staying with my parents who, after seeing the evidence of tampering, have completely changed their tune about me overreacting. I never thought I'd be saying this, but I'm genuinely concerned for our safety. How do we fight against people willing to go this far? Is it even possible to legally protect ourselves from family members who seem to have no limits? The restraining order seems insufficient against people who are playing such elaborate psychological games. But what else can I do? Update number 2. So, it's been 2 weeks since my last update, and I've been hesitant to post because everything feels like it's happening at warp speed. But I need to vent, and honestly, your advice is invaluable. First, the good news, the baby is perfectly fine. The doctor did an extensive check, and our little guy's right on track. The prenatal vitamin situation, however, was worse than we thought. The lab confirmed they've been tampered with. Somebody had added a crushing laxative, which could have caused dehydration and possibly early labor if my wife had continued to take them. The police were taking this very serious. We've been staying with my parents while securing our home, and my wife has been on an emotional roller coaster. One minute she's determined to fight back, the next she's questioning if she deserves all this trouble she's causing. Well, 25 years of emotional abuse is hard to shake even with therapy. Now for the new development. 3 days ago, my father-in-law, he called me up straight up, just him and me directly. Something he's never really done before. He started with what seemed like a peace offering, saying he wanted to resolve things like men. Then came the real reason for his call. He informed me that he's been appointed as trustee for my wife's health insurance policy through a family trust established by her late grandfather. Well, the thing is, he threatened to terminate this coverage unless my wife makes amends with her mother. This revolution could not have come at a worse time. My company's currently restructuring and there's a chance I could be laid off in the next round of cuts. If that happens, we've been relying on my wife's insurance coverage for the pregnancy and delivery. Switching insurance plans this late in a pregnancy would mean enormous out-of-pocket cost we can't afford, not to mention the risk of complications being classified as pre-existing conditions. When I pointed out how twisted it was to threaten his own daughter's health care while she's pregnant, my father-in-law coldly told me that actions have consequences, and that we would, be bringing this on ourselves by disrespecting my mother-in-law. He made it clear that this was just the beginning of what they could do if my wife, quote, did not come to her senses and welcome her mother back into our lives. Yesterday, we received a certified letter from an attorney representing my in-laws. They're seeking grandparents' rights to our unborn baby, claiming my wife is mentally unstable and that I'm coercively controlling her. You want to know the evidence? How about years of therapy sessions, which they're framing as proof of their instability rather than attempting to heal from their abuse? But they crossed the final line last night. My wife's childhood diary, the one place she felt safe expressing herself as a kid, was scanned and emailed to several of our friends and family members, with her most vulnerable entries highlighted. Entries where she questioned her worth, wrote about dark thoughts, and even a page where a 14-year-old, she written about how she sometimes wished she wasn't here. My in-laws included a message saying, quote, "This is who is about to become a mother. Should someone this broken really be raising a child?" My wife is beyond devastated. She didn't even know that they had kept her diary all these years. It was likely they've been saving this nuclear option, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy her. And to make matters even worse, my wife received an email today from their HR department at her company. Apparently someone claimed to be her health advocate, calling them to discuss pregnancy accommodation options, and mentioned my wife might need extended leave for psychiatric reasons. The caller had enough personal details to sound legitimate, including my wife's employer's ID number, information that was in her wallet when her mother visited. Now, her workplace is requesting a doctor's note clearing her for continued work during pregnancy, something that was never an issue before. I've never been the vengeful type, but something in me has changed. These people aren't just toxic, they're dangerous, and I'm done playing defense. Our lawyer is aggressive and confident, and we have documentation of everything. The police investigation into the vitamin tampering is ongoing, but I'm taking additional steps now. And I've hired a private investigator to look into my in-laws' finances. My father-in-law's always bragged about his business success, but there have been rumors about shady dealings. I'm also compiling a complete record of my wife's childhood medical neglect. Incidents where injuries were left untreated, necessary medications forgotten, and appointments canceled because they were, quote, too busy. My wife initially hesitated about fighting back, afraid it would make things worse, but after the diary incident, something shifted in her too. She looked at me last night, hands protectively over her belly, and said, "They'll never have a relationship with our son, ever." The next phase of this nightmare is coming, and for the first time, I don't feel afraid. I feel ready. Update number 3. Hey, so it's been 3 weeks since my last update, and things have taken several unexpected turns. I'm writing this from a hospital waiting room. Don't worry, it's not what you think, but I'll get to that. After meeting with the criminal attorney, we decide to hold off on pressing charges for the vitamin tampering. Not because we're forgiving them, but because our lawyer suggested gathering more evidence first. As it turns out, that was the right call. My in-laws, apparently sensing we were building a case, launched what I can only describe as a shock and awe campaign against us. First, they contacted every member of our extended family with elaborate stories about my wife's, quote, dangerous mental state and my controlling abuse. They even created a private Facebook group called Concerned for, my wife's name, where they shared doctored screenshots of text convos and manipulated photos to make it look like my wife was living in fear. My own cousin, who I've been close to since childhood, called me in tears asking if I needed help getting away from my toxic marriage. When I explained what was really happening, she forwarded me the evidence my in-law sent her. Photos of my wife with what looks like bruises. It was makeup from a Halloween costume 2 years ago and texts that had been edited to change their entire meaning. Then came the final attack. It was financial. My wife's credit score plummeted overnight. Somebody applied for 3 credit cards and 2 personal loans in her name. The fraud department confirmed the application included her correct social and mother's maiden name, and we spent days freezing her credit card and filing reports. But the most extreme move came 4 days ago. My wife started feeling strange for eating lunch, dizzy, nauseous, and struggling to keep focus. So we rushed her to the ER, terrified for the baby. The doctor ran toxicology tests and found traces of a medication that can cause, miscarriages in the first trimester. Thankfully, at 7 months, the risk of the baby was minimal, but my wife had been monitored overnight. How did this happen? Well, that morning, a congratulations gift basket was delivered to our door with no card. My wife ate a few of the cookies before noticing they tasted slightly bitter. The police have the remaining cookies for testing, and the security footage from our new camera showing the delivery person was legitimate. They were just delivering a package ordered by someone else. That's where the private investigator I mentioned became worth his weight in gold. While investigating my in-laws' finances, he discovered something shocking. Mother-in-law was researching how to legally adopt a child born into an unfit mother. There were emails between her and several adoption attorneys discussing scenarios where grandparents could gain custody of a newborn if the mother was deemed incapacitated or unstable. The picture became horrifyingly clear. They weren't just trying to control her, they were trying to take our baby. With this new evidence, the police took immediate action. My in-laws were brought in for questioning regarding the tampering incident, and search warrants were executed at both their hotel room and my brother-in-law's house where they have been staying intermittently. What they found was a treasure trove of evidence, notebooks detailing their plan to document my wife's instability, receipts for the ingredients used in tampered vitamins and food, and most damning of all, a draft of a legal petition for emergency custody of an infant, with our son's projected birth date already filled in. My in-laws were arrested yesterday on multiple charges, including attempted assault on a pregnant woman, fraud, stalking, conspiracy. My brother-in-law claims he knew nothing about their plan, but the police found evidence that he's been helping them track my wife's movement through a shared location app that she didn't even know was on her phone, an old family account she never deleted. So why am I in a hospital waiting room? Because after hearing about her parents' arrest, my wife went into premature labor, all from the stress. She's 35 weeks along, not dangerously premature, but still earlier than we wanted. The doctors are trying to stop the contractions now, and I just never imagined protecting my family would mean fighting against the very people who should have loved my wife most. The criminal charges will ensure that they can't harm us physically anymore. But how do we recover from this emotionally? How do I help my wife heal from this ultimate betrayal while she's bringing my new life into the world? And what do we tell our son someday about our grandparents who tried to steal him before he was even born? I'm terribly exhausted and angry beyond words. The nurse just told my wife, is asking for me, so I need to go. Update number 4. It's been just over a month since my last update, and I'm writing this in a quiet hour of the early morning, with my newborn son sleeping peacefully in his bassinet next to me. Yes, despite the doctor's efforts, my wife went into labor shortly after my last update. Our little fighter arrived at 35 weeks and 3 days, small but mighty, with a set of lungs that left no doubt about his fighting spirit. The first week was tense as he spent time in the NICU for monitoring, but he's home now and thriving. My wife has been incredible throughout all this. Her strength continues to amaze me daily. As for my in-laws, they're facing serious legal consequences. The district attorney is pursuing maximum charges, especially after the evidence regarding the drugged food. They were denied bail as a flight risk due to their overseas connections and currently awaiting trial. The private investigator was worth every single penny. Turns out, father-in-law's successful business is built on fraud, tax evasion, and misappropriation of funds, and several shell companies hiding assets. He's been using my brother-in-law's identity for some of these shady dealings, which explains why they've been financially supporting him so generously. It wasn't love, it was hush money. This revelation has complicated matters for my brother-in-law, who's now cooperating with authorities to minimize his own legal exposure. He claims that he didn't understand the full extent of what his parents were doing, both financially and regarding their plans for the baby. Whether that's true or not, he's providing additional evidence that strengthened the case against them. The most unexpected development came last week, when my wife received a letter from her maternal grandmother, a woman that she believed passed away when she was a kid. Apparently, her parents had fabricated the grandmother's death after the family fallout. This 82-year-old woman had been trying to reconnect with my wife for years, but all her letters have been intercepted. She found us through the news reports about the arrest. So we video called yesterday. The family resembling is striking, and watching my wife connect with a loving family member who actually values her, it's been healing in ways I never knew. Her grandmother shared stories of fighting to see my wife as a child, only to be told she was busy or not interested inside of a relationship. She even showed us returned birthday cards that she sent every year marked, quote, "return to sender." As for the inheritance mentioned in my earlier update, the money from my wife's other grandmother that her parents were withholding, our lawyer has discovered that they spent most of it years ago. What little remains will likely go toward restitution in their fraud case. It's a financial loss, but my wife says the emotional freedom is far, far worth more. So, we've been working with victim advocates to ensure that we've notified of any developments in the criminal case, and we've obtained a permanent restraining order that will remain in effect until they've eventually avoided jail time. The most powerful moment came 3 days ago when my wife was finally ready to go through the box of her childhood belongings that the police recovered from her parents' storage unit. Among the items was a small trophy from a piano recital that she was 9, a competition she won that her parents had dismissed as unimportant, because her brother had not participated. Seeing her hold the trophy, reading her own name engraved in it, was like watching her reclaim a piece of her history that had been stolen. We're focusing on our son now, on creating the warm, loving home that my wife never had. Her therapist visits weekly, helping her process the complex emotions of becoming a mother, while dealing with the criminal case against her own parents. Final update. Hey guys, well, it's been 6 long months since my last update, and I'm writing this one-handed while my 8-month-old son sleeps peacefully on my chest. That's right, so much has changed, and yet, in the quiet moments like this, it always feels wonderfully simple. Our little boy's doing great, and so is my wife. As for my in-laws, it's probably the question of the hour, right? Well, their legal saga reached its conclusion exactly 3 weeks ago. Both pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation with the broader financial crimes investigation. My father-in-law, he received 8 years of a prison sentence for the combined charges of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to harm my wife and unborn child. My mother-in-law, she just received 5 years. The plea deal included permanent restraining orders against contacting our son, and restitution payments that'll go into the trust from my brother-in-law's children who were innocent victims in all of this. I mean, come on. Well, speaking of my brother-in-law, his story took an unexpected turn. After initially cooperating with authorities, he entered intensive therapy and began to understand the extent of his parents' manipulation. He was granted immunity, finally, he got it. Well, it was his testimony against them and is now rebuilding his life. His relationship with my wife is tentatively healing. They meet monthly for coffee, also always in a public spot. Always with clear boundaries set in process, and his children adore their aunt and cousin, and watching them play together, it brings my wife a complicated joy that she's still processing in therapy. The vacation property that was uncovered during the fraud investigation, a beach house my in-laws purchased with misappropriated funds but kept secret from everybody, has been seized. However, since some of the money traced back to my wife's stolen inheritance, we've been awarded a percentage of the sale proceeds. We've decided to use that money to establish foundations supporting children from abusive homes, focusing particularly on the invisible emotional abuse that my wife endured. My wife rediscovered grandmother has become a beloved presence in our lives. She's moved closer to us 3 months ago, and the bond she's forming with her great-grandson is beautiful to witness. As for me, watching my wife bloom into the confident mother and woman she's always meant to be has been the greatest privilege of my life. So was I the a-hole for kicking my mother-in-law out that night? Maybe. But sometimes being an a-hole is exactly what love requires.